Data Master Summit 2021, presented to you by Tamer.
Hi, my name's Ravi Halassi and I'm Tamer's Chief Cloud Evangelist. Welcome to this Data Masters session where we're going to talk about the ins and outs of migrating to the cloud. I'm thrilled to have Andrew Saltis joining me today from Singapore. For those who haven't met Andrew, Andrew leads the data and analytics and AI technology practice across the APAC region for Google. Andrew, welcome and thank you so much for joining us across the world.
Thank you, Ravi. It's my pleasure to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. Let's dig into cloud migrations then. So most companies have now come to the conclusion that the cloud's here and here to stay. So it's no longer a case of when they need to move to the cloud, but they just need to acknowledge it's going to happen. So there's a lot to consider in moving to the cloud, moving data and applications. And I'm just wondering, can you tell us a bit how Google advises their customers to get started? Some of the considerations that you've had as you've worked with so many Fortune 500 companies to do this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the things that we say, and you're right, everyone is moving and they're on some phase of that journey, whether they're already there all the way or usually some way on that path. And we see it unfold in multiple different ways that they do that. But the key thing that we always try to start with is, what is the business outcome you're after? So instead of chasing shiny objects in technology, to really start with the business problem and then work back from there. But then as you do that and you migrate, it's really not this lift everything and lift all the data, even once you identify the use case, and just put it there. And it really does provide that opportunity to take a look into what you're doing in that process and to reevaluate. Right? And a lot of times, customers have all sorts of legacy technologies. Right? And even if they've been working on them, they're still quite different than what you see in the cloud. So we often, even though there's sometimes these migration patterns of lift and shift and then modernize, then completely cloud native, more and more customers look at that, and that's like a multi-migration process. And they don't want to do it, right, for very good reasons, because it's already complex enough. So you look to go from what you're currently doing to what would be the optimal solution in the cloud. And that solution in the cloud is often not the same way you build things on-prem. Right? The scale is different, the capabilities are different. So I'd say that don't look at it as the traditional approach to upgrading a version of a relational database or a big data platform or anything like that, where you're stuck with kind of that same architecture, but to really step back, look at the business process, look at the best patterns of how to achieve that goal. And then as you start to move the data, I think that's where Tamer plays just an absolutely critical role, right? Because it's like, how do you start to move the data intelligently? And how do you take care of making sure that what lands there is actually clean and gold, right? And really go through and get all the data there correctly. And I think I've heard it referred to before, and I think it's classic, right? Of just, Tamer's like the washing machine, right? So get that data through and out the other side. And then at the same time, as you're achieving that business goal, leveraging the best patterns of how to do that in the cloud.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think you've really hit a note there. As people focus on shiny objects, the cloud's got so much allure, but there's that fundamental problem with getting the data right and making sure it happens in a timely manner. So obviously a cloud migration project can take a varying amount of time, from weeks to months to years. So with such a varied time frame, what's the first thing that you tell your customers to start with?
Start with something small, first off, and oftentimes something that you can't do on-prem, right? Prove of the value add of what you can do. Look for a use case that's going to add to the bottom line. If you have use cases where it's really just an IT cost and it's kind of perhaps just operational, the reward for going there isn't that great. Right? So one, I think it comes down to training people and incentivizing people that want to do it, right? And finding that use case that does add to the bottom line. And often it comes to use cases that are really hard to achieve with traditional technologies. And so how, regardless of what the business is, what's a use case that's kind of forward thinking in that business, and drive towards that outcome. And then you get everyone in the organization fairly excited about it, because it's something that's going to help move the business forward, something that helps them grow, something that retains talent, which is always a critical thing, that you have them engaged, And it's not just take this 20-year-old program and now go make it run in the cloud, all right, where people start to fall asleep thinking about it. So we look at, not doing resume-driven development and chasing shiny objects, starting with the business use case, oftentimes helping IT be a business partner, and really looking towards something that helps solve a business need that you could really benefit from there. But starting small is critical, right? So you could have small success. And you look at just software over the years, everyone adopted kind of like these agile methodologies like 20 years ago. But then sometimes people don't apply that to migration. All right, so it's really a matter of going, how do I pick something that's a critical business use case that I can't do today and go do that on the cloud and kind of show value, show wins, and then keep iterating on that process. And it's oftentimes a transformational experience. And businesses are kind of transforming as they do that and reinventing what they do and how they perform.
Yeah, we see so many parallels, Andrew, with many of our data ops approaches where we start with one key entity, master that, declare success, and also get buy-in, and use that as a springboard so that future projects can be approached, whereas before they may have been deemed too long, too risky, too costly to run. So tell me, for customers who've maybe gone to the cloud earlier, we're seeing them now adopt a cross-cloud approach, understanding that there are benefits for embracing with many different cloud vendors. Any advice for people leaning in this direction?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think that's right? And we realize that even though, of course, we like to say that every customer is just using Google, that's not the case, right? That'll never be the case. That customers do run on multiple clouds. And in some cases, you see in some industries that it starts to become a regulatory requirement. Right? And you think about just risk concentration of running the same all workloads on one. You take a small country that may have, say, like 4 major banks. If they're all running the same workload on one cloud, we all like to say that we never go down. There's service interruptions that happens. So what if that primary cloud goes down that's running the same workload for 4 major banks in a country? You put the stability of that country at risk. So you see this, this risk concentration that you'll see regulators across the world start to adopt, enforcing different entities to run on multiple clouds. So I think when you do that, there's lots of different ways to handle it. We see some that run infrastructure on one, analytics and AI on another. We see some that run multiple workloads. There's data gravity. There's different ways to solve it, and there's different ways to look for it. And that, again, comes down to oftentimes adopting best practices. But it starts with, when you look at, I think, where Tamer fits in there beautifully is how do you have that clean data to go across? How do you get data going to multiple places, right? So in some cases, it's not, I want to run the same exact workload on multiple clouds. Oftentimes we see customers that don't want that duplication. They want the flexibility to move. I know we offer technologies like BigQuery Omni to allow them to query data wherever it is across them. But oftentimes it's, I'm going to do AI on this cloud or analytics on this particular cloud, and then I may run our infrastructure on Cloud X instead. Right? So we see them taking that approach, and it really is understanding the journey. And I'd say before jumping into more than one cloud, be successful on one and understand it. All right? Understand the limitations and understand where it goes. The idea of I'm going to create just a generic platform so I can move everything from one to the other, that's back to the same argument that we had in the industry years ago. I need to write everything to be database agnostic because I'm going to change from Microsoft to Oracle possibly next month. And the reality is you don't. You don't just make those drastic changes overnight. So I'd say optimize for where it makes sense, use the tools that make sense, and then where workloads make sense on a different cloud, then you look there. And oftentimes it's also the same thing of you have data residency. Sometimes data is born in one cloud and it just doesn't make sense to move it. So operate on it there. Share results possibly. So there's different strategies as customers adopt kind of this multi-cloud approach. Sometimes it's multi-cloud with different workloads. And we often see also hybrid cloud, where now it is I want to run on-prem, and then I want to do things in the cloud. And we see that across machine learning pipelines, We see it across modernization of Spark applications to run on-prem, modernize it to the cloud. So we see different approaches that customers take, and there really isn't a one-size-fits-all. And then we've seen some that are dedicated and they're just all in on one cloud, and that works for their business.
Yeah, I think the data journey you mentioned there resonates a lot with our experience, where we see customers choosing to skip, or not necessarily choosing, but just having to skip that data management, that data mastering step, as they're so focused on downstream steps like implementing a data governance program. And I think one of the challenges we see with this approach is the downstream processes will fail because they're being fed poor quality data. And so people end up with a poor experience and aren't really able to make the most of the applications that have been deployed. And so it's not necessarily a problem of the technology itself, such as data governance or analytics, but people see it in that manner because really they can't achieve the business outcomes that they're looking to. So in your experience, how have you been able to guide customers to take that data first approach, or at least treat data as a first class citizen when considering migrations even before downstream applications?
Yeah, and I think that's really good. I think you're spot on. I have customers leap to, I don't have governance on-prem, or it's been weak, so this is great. Now I get to have data governance in the cloud, and they jump to it. And I think one way that you can get people, and we try to help people kind of start to think about it, everyone's moved homes at some point in time. And it's kind of, you can think about that same way. If you lived in a house for 20 years and you go to move across country or across, domestically or internationally, it'd be the same thing of saying, I'm just going to pack up everything I've had for 20 years, put it in a truck, and everything will be great in this house that I move into. But the reality is that's a complete waste. You end up with, garbage in, garbage out, right? As opposed to, let me go through and do spring cleaning. Let me kind of get out all the things that I haven't used in 15 years and then put it on, a truck and then have it when you get there, right? So you end up with a clean inventory list and a clean way to unpack on the other end. And it really is trying to help people get out of the mindset of, well, we've always kept this data. Great. For what? Well, we're not quite sure we may need it. Fine. Archive it. All right. We haven't used it in, a dozen years. Right? You don't have a regulatory reason to retain it. And really, I think it also then comes back to go through that business use case. Governance has its place, but having a catalog of data that's irrelevant or dirty doesn't help. And I think that's exactly what you're kind of talking through of I go to run an algorithm over this data and the data is garbage. And then what do you get, right? So it's thinking through and helping customers see that data quality has a paramount importance to happen first. So therefore, you could solve the use cases. You could add the catalog into it after the fact, right? But cataloging something that is dirty, if you will, or irrelevant doesn't get you there. Right? People now could find something that's no longer useful anyway. So I think we try to work with customers and try to work through of, there's a process to do this, of how to actually achieve the business outcome, but you can't really skip some of the steps along the way. Of really the first thing of figure out the use case, figure out something that's compelling, figure out the data that's needed for that use case, find the sources. Is it clean? Is it not? Master it, put it together, and then achieve the use case. Right? And then you could catalog it. Right? But I think people try to boil the ocean and sometimes start with, I have governance because I never had it before and I need it. And they fail to think about the other steps. And I think it's oftentimes they're not used to having quality data in their legacy systems to begin with. Right? Everyone that's built any sort of data pipeline over the years, there's so much of it that's involved in just triaging and massaging data and having all sorts of ways to work around things that should just be cleaned before being migrated.
So clearly, Andrew, you're also a proponent of mastering the data, getting it fit for purpose before completing the migration process. And that's clearly migrating and mastering data is something that Tamer does very well. Can you talk a bit about how Tamer's mastering approach can complement Google's tremendous product suite in the cloud?
Yeah, so I think it fits perfectly, right? And I think we're on the same page of like how it fits together well. You look at it as customers that run, data proc that we have for doing data processing, that do machine learning. I think if you break it down, Tamer shows a great reference architecture of how to build an application like that that's modern in the cloud, of how to take something and say, look, we're going to follow these best practices of it runs using a data prod, and then it's using machine learning on it. It's training models and patterns and basically continuing to integrate those. So it does show, you start to look at it and you look at your documentation, the architectures, and you start to break it down. It shows a great use case for customers of this is how you can think about a modern application. Right? So it does leverage and runs in a customer tenant, uses our technology, runs on top of it, natively and very well. So it really just kind of show you could get data coming in, you could get data into BigQuery, you could populate a catalog, really kind of integrate with everything on all around it. All right. So follow best practices on platform, integrate with things around the platform, which makes it seamless for customers. Right? And there is part of the marketplace. Right? So very easy that we see for customers to use it. It naturally fits together, naturally integrates with the surrounding technologies. And then as you step back, you could also have an opportunity to use as a teaching tool for customers to explain this type of architecture is how you should think about building things, not just lift something that's 20 years old and plunk it in the cloud.
And so let's take a look with our audience now at this next generation migration framework. And so as you can see on screen here, there's that suite of core data management functionality and best practices being shown. We've got data starting from original sources, going through the movement, through that transformational process before being delivered for applications such as analytics, AI, and governance to really take advantage of that master data. And so what we can see here is in the middle, I think, is the points that we've been discussing, Andrew, that data mastering is really a really foundational keystone component of this flow. The flow is less effective without taking the time and focus on mastering the data itself. And this is not only in the migration phase, but also on an ongoing basis as well. So as new records are coming in to the freshly migrated cloud, they need some care and attention as well, cleaning, enriching, mastering them too. So Andrew, how does this framework resonate with you when you put proposals together for clients to migrate?
I think you hit it spot on when you said that it's not just the migration, but it's continuous records. And I think you look at it as businesses today are no longer static, and everything's changed. And I think this pandemic has showed of how people need to have agility, how businesses need to be able to adjust immediately, how they change how they process information, how they need to look at new sources of information. So I think the way that this fits in really well is it's not just that initial migration, that initial workload. It's great. You need to have the clean data to make that really successful and really shine. But then after that, there's going to be, yes, continuous data that's coming in for that use case, but undoubtedly there's going to be another source of data, and it's going to be another stream of data, and they're just going to keep going. All right? And you just look across even the simplest use cases that customers start to try and figure out, how do I transform my business? How do I think about things differently? Everyone's now a data company, or they're changing to be everyone's an AI company. That all takes data, and often many different sources of data to produce a meaningful result. So I think that's exactly right. It's not just the migration, but we look at it as saying, well, great, you have one data source today, you're going to have 10 tomorrow. Right? How then do you figure that out? You're going to have customer information that's coming from a multitude of sources. How are you going to understand it's the same customer every time you see a piece of data coming in? Yeah, so I think it's right on and I think that chart shows it correctly that it's there in that middle, because every time data is flowing, it should go through this process. Right? It's not a one-time I'm migrating, I'll clean and shut it off. Right? I guess if your business doesn't change, for the next decade, there's no new data of that source or no new sources, maybe that works. But there's not a lot of businesses that are staying in that state. Right? Everyone has transactions that happen. Everyone has new customers to be a thriving business. And as things continue to change, there's many more data sources constantly coming online. So being able to stitch those together, being able to identify the same entity, whether that's a person whether it's a piece of machinery, whether it's something you're building, all the different things that you want to do to have a master record for whatever that entity is in a business, it becomes essential because you want to keep building on these use cases. You want to be able to do more and more advanced types of things. Data is the key. Everyone talks about data as the new oil. Actually, like clean data is the oil. Right? Otherwise, you just have sludge.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and we see this with a lot of our customers where they start with a given number of data sources, but as they see the process is attainable and delivers excellent results, they start to get an appetite for more data, especially from third-party data providers who are bringing a wealth of information into the data ecosystem, and let alone where there's cases such as mergers and acquisitions where there's a whole raft of new data to onboard as well. So the challenges with integrating that data continue to happen as a company evolves. Any takeaways for our audience in terms of how to get started on their cloud migration journey?
I'd say takeaway, like a couple of things. First, find a business problem that's digestible, right? That you could have a quick win with, that will show results. That'll help you get to that next level. You get further buy-in from the business. You show results doing it. So I'd say start with that problem, identifying that first. The data sources, have a way to clean that data coming in using Tamer to get there. And then look at what are best practices of how do you actually solve that business problem. So I would say break that out into identify it, so you have tangible results for it. And then from that, figure out what data you need to solve that use case, what the source or most likely sources are, how do you get that there, and then follow best practices for how to achieve that goal. And it's, I think it's a classic thing of there's always next version, right? Of not boiling the ocean, but how to figure out to do exactly what you're talking about, right? If it's successful, you'll get more investment to have more sources of data. So how do you show success? If it is mergers that happen or, divestitures where now you get to leave as a new company that often gets the gift of legacy systems to take with you to start off a new company. How do you start to master stuff together? So I would say business problem always first. So you're not just chasing shiny objects and you keep people honest. And then from that, then start at the back and go, what data do we need? What does it look like when it's clean? Now, after that, what does it look like to build the applications, whether it's analytics or AI on top of it, to then solve that problem? And as you grow, governance makes sense. Right? But first, I think you have to be able to, I like to say, pour water through the whole thing and have the whole thing working and understand it, show results.
And so to our audience, we'll actually be sharing a guide with you on how to make the most of your Google Cloud migration with Tamer. It's going to be a 3-part series. Firstly, migrating to the cloud, what to expect on day one. Then from there, optimizing the process and incorporating additional data. And then also taking a look at how the organization can benefit from democratized data. So look forward to receiving that soon. And with that, Andrew, I'd really like to thank you today for your time and your insights. We've had a great discussion, and I'm sure the audience have understood and resonated with a lot of the points that we've gone through today.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful day. I appreciate this.
Thank you. And to our audience, we wish you happy migrations. Thank you.